All right. Well, thank you for having me. This group, my home group, I moved to Grand Forks in 2012. Before that, my home group was the Northern Plains group, but this was like my secondary home group because just give you a little background on how this meeting started. Chad B. started it in his house, literally across the field right over there. Meeting kind of guys he sponsored and his friends in his home. And he told his sponsor, and his sponsor said he was being selfish because he wasn't opening it up to newcomers and it wasn't open to the public. So this meeting started on a sponsor's suggestion. And it was grounded in the big book from day one. We used to meet on the other side over there and just read through the big book, and we'd always try and select the most anxious, self-absorbed new guy to read out loud as possible, because we knew that's what sometimes he, it was usually a he we picked on, needed. And we would go through and read the big book. We were incredibly unorganized. We were collecting money, but it was just adding up and not going anywhere. So I was like, okay, that's it. And we weren't even registered with GSO. So this group's official birthday is April 6th of 2006 is when this group registered with GSO. So yes, give yourself a round of applause. Because for a meeting to go on that long and continue to go on that long, it's doing something right. It just is. It's grounded in the big book. It's grounding in the steps, the traditions, and the concepts. It's there for the newcomer. And it's really clear that this group is one of the few groups in Fargo that really I see doing all the aspects of service, working with newcomers, working with people still in sobriety, and also very involved in the service structure of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is just as important as anything else to make sure it works and it keeps going. So thank you again. In this meeting, it's very clearly doing things right. I mean, you're still meeting in the same place, which that just doesn't have, meetings usually bounce around quite a bit. So that's pretty awesome too. So if this is your home group, absolutely give yourself a little pat on the back, because this is one of the great meetings in Fargo-Moorhead, I think. So I am an alcoholic. There's absolutely no ambiguity about that in my head. I believe I was destined from birth to be an alcoholic. If you look at my family tree, the people in my family tree who are not alcoholics are the weird ones. They're the ones that just don't get, it's very abnormal if you come from my family and you don't have either some sort of substance abuse and or mental health problem. And I knew from a very early age that I was off. I don't know how to describe it other than the fact that existing and being alive in the universe is a painful state for me to exist in and to be in. Like, just being alive is uncomfortable, because I'm one of those people where at the exact same moment in space and time, I am worse than you and better than you at the same time. It's not going back and forth. I feel those two emotions at the same moment in time, where I know clearly you should be just grateful that I'm even looking at you, and also that I don't even deserve to be around you at the same time. And that's just a very hard state of existence to live in. I mean, the first time I ever got messed up on anything was when Agassiz was still the middle school. I was huffing glue in 7th grade art class. I still have to be careful when I'm writing with Sharpie markers, because there's just something about anything that gets me out of me that feels good. And I grew up in a house where drinking was hard for me to get a hold of, because my dad sobered up, I think it was November of '76. And I grew up in a house where feelings except anger weren't talked about very often. And from an early age, my dad flat out told me, if you are ever stupid enough to get into trouble, don't call me, because I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you spend more time in jail and that you have even more trouble occurring. And then when you get home, I'm going to kick your ass. And it wasn't like a theoretical, verbal, no, it was like blue collar, traditional, boy, you do something stupid, I'm going to beat you down. And he had ornery old man strength, so I knew he could do it. So drinking was a challenge for me. The first time I drank, I was 17, and it was just a beautiful experience all around. Because when I drink, something happens to me, usually around drink 3. It can happen earlier in the first one, and sometimes, if it's a normal person's drink, it's like drink 5 or 6. But around the 3rd drink, what happens is that out of place feeling I have that feeling less than and better than, that hole in my gut, that, thinking the world's looking down on me, all of those insecurities, everything, the anxieties of thinking about what happened yesterday and what's going to happen tomorrow and how I need to control this and what are they going to do this and this person's thinking about me, all that just melts away and I'm able to just, just breathe out, just exhale and just be okay with existence. But the problem is, and I didn't have any words to describe this until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, is I start drinking, my body physically reacts different to alcohol than your average, as your big book says, average normal temperate drinker. I get more and more thirstier. My mindset, even to this day, if I read like a Tylenol bottle and it says, 2 to 3 every 4 to 6 hours, my mind inverts those numbers and I read 4 to 6 every 2 to 3 hours. I just think that if anything has an internal effect on me, I need more of it. And with alcohol, it just grows on itself and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And today, they estimate that about 8 to 10% of the population reacts differently to booze. And that has to do, and it's beyond my education level, but there is a physiological breakdown of how we break down booze that causes that physical reaction in alcoholics. And I just thought that's how everyone drank, because everyone in my family drank that way. My dad, before he sobered up, drank that way. All of his brothers drank that way. On my mom's side, she didn't. And I can say this because I know she's okay with it. She has the trifecta of alcoholic perfection in her life, as I like to call it. She created an alcoholic, she married one, and she came from an alcoholic. So she's actually a really awesome member of Al-Anon today, which I love that program because it's given me my mom back. And all of my grandpa's brothers are alcoholics. I have cousins, brothers, like everyone is an alcoholic in my family. So non-alcoholic drinking was weird. Then I got out of the house and really started drinking a lot. I tried the geographic maneuver, thinking that everything in Fargo was the problem. And my personality, I tend to be a bit of a bull in a china shop and do everything to the extreme. So my idea of a geographic was I'm going to move to Spain for 3 months. And that was easy to do because when you're an undergrad and you walk into NDSU's financial aid office, it's like an ATM almost if you have decent credit. So I put a lot of zeros into my bank account, went to Europe for 3 months. I had the perfect class schedule for drinking. I didn't have class till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The bars don't close, and there was a cafe in our building where we had class where you could go get an 8-ounce glass of beer for 75 cents, or you just buy a Fanta, dump half of it out, fill it up with vodka, and drink during class, and that just solved problems, So that's what I did there. Drank pretty much nonstop, came back when I was 22, and then that next year was it got progressively worse and worse and worse. It wasn't if I was going to black out, it was when I was going to black out. So then it became a game of trying to push the blackout back farther in the evening when it occurred, and then hoping that your phone didn't ring, if you still had my phone, whenever I came out of the blackout the next day. One time I got really obsessive about that. I figured out how much of my last year of drinking I spent in a blackout, and I estimated about 10% of that year I was in a blackout. And somehow I managed, I'm one of those, and this is a complete oxymoron of a statement, was a functioning alcoholic. And really the only reason I was is because I had such a massive inferiority complex that if I failed at anything, it would justify all of those internal horrible feelings that I had. So everything I had to do had to be amazing and spectacular, or just not do it at all. That it's all or nothing with me. I don't have a medium setting on anything I do. It's high on everything. And until finally, I just turned 23, and my birthday's in December, and that winter break from school at NDSU was a particularly harsh drinking episode for me, where it was just one bad experience after another. So I took like a week off from drinking and then went down to the cities to visit a buddy of mine because I thought, hey, drinking in the cities will somehow, I don't know, different or something. And the last drink I remember drinking, I know I took more, was at, I don't even know what bar it was, but I still remember clear as day getting my last drink, and it came in a fishbowl, and it's designed for a group of people, and I just thought this is just the right size drink. So my last drink is sitting at a bar in downtown Minneapolis, holding a fishbowl like this, and just pounding that thing down because it was so beautiful. My next memory is waking up on the floor of my buddy's apartment, and halfway in the kitchen, halfway in the living room, crawling to the bathroom to puke because I couldn't move my legs because I was so dehydrated. My legs were cramped up, so anything below the knee I couldn't move because the muscles were all seized up. So I was crawling on my elbows to the bathroom, got to the toilet, and I started puking up a little bit of blood for the first time. And I was just like, well, that's abnormal. And then I'm just like, something's got to change. You talk about, in AA, people talk about in their stories having different spiritual experiences or moments of awakening, things like that. And this was one of those for me, I think, because I just remember clearly in the back of my mind thinking, either something changes or I just keep doing this until I don't wake up from a blackout. Like those were the options available to me. So on the drive back from the cities, I wasn't driving, thank God. I sat in the passenger seat and just stared outside the whole drive. And it was a gloomy, like a depressing day. And I got back into Fargo. It's about 8 o'clock at night. And I went to my parents' house, and I asked my dad. I walked in the house and I asked him if we could talk. And he goes, yeah. And he's like, do you want your mom here? I'm like, nope. So my mom went to the other room, and I was talking with my dad, and I just trying to hold back the tears, and I just got out, when did you know you had a problem drinking? And he stopped, and he breathed in for a second. And I later found out that this was an answer to his prayers. Because if you ask my dad, when did he know I was an alcoholic? He'll tell you, he's like, yeah, I knew you were an alcoholic when you were about 2 or 3. I could see it in how you interacted with the world, how you felt, how you related to things. Like, I just knew that you were an alcoholic. So he wasn't too entirely surprised. My mom was blindsided. She was, oh my God, completely clueless. And the question I asked him, he didn't tell me I was an alcoholic or anything. He just, as you'll find when you get into AA, we don't actually tell anyone they're an alcoholic. We say a lot of, well, maybes, or here you go, or this might be, or here's some questions. And he gave me a question and goes, well, when you start drinking, do you know what's going to happen? Yes or no? And when I start drinking, I have no clue in hell what's going to happen. Like, I don't know. I don't know how many I'm going to have. I don't know who I'm going to hurt. I don't know how I'm going to get home. All moral guide rails go out the window. Anything can happen when I start drinking because it completely turns off any inhibition in me, any self-control, any desires, any wishes I have for righteous living go right out the window when I drink. Unless I try and control my drinking, which is just absolutely probably one of the most miserable experiences in my existence. Because there were a few times where I forcibly stopped myself to stop at the third drink, and it just sucks so much. Because all I do is just sit and spin for about 12 hours that I wasn't drinking. That's all I would think about, was that I wasn't drinking. I'm not drinking. I need to be drinking. How can I not be drinking? I want to be drinking. So he reached under the table, coffee room table, handed me a copy of a big book that a friend of his had given, and that's my primary big book I have to this day I still use. And it was, by this time, it was a Sunday, and it was after 8 o'clock, so there were no meetings going on. So he called a friend of his, asked if there was a good meeting for me to go to the next day. Got that, gave me the big book, and said, go to this meeting tomorrow. And actually, that meeting was the 5:30 meeting that meets up at Hope North. And I was lucky because it was their birthday meeting that night, so it wasn't sharing, so I was able to sneak in, sit in the back, and just listen. Because if I had, I would have ran out the door screaming if it was like some deep interpersonal meeting or something, And the first person that gets up there, I was 23. I've been sober. Well, I should tell you that was January 30th of 2005 is when I sobered up. And So here I was, this 23-year-old, just arrogant undergrad at India. Just, oh God, I just look back at who I was when I was 23, and I just think, why did no one just beat me down? Like, I was the type of person that you see out at bars where you just think that person the universe needs to just beat them down just because they deserve it. Like, I was just such a prick. Oh my God. And I just was judging the person that was sharing. And I'm thankful to this day for that woman, because she shared about her feelings. You know, she shared about that internal less than that she felt and how the hole filled up when she drank. And I just about fell out of my chair, because here's this person identifying and speaking about what I'd been feeling my whole life. And I realized for the first time that, oh my God, this, A, I'm not alone, and B, as the Big Book chapter says, there is a solution to this deal. There is a thing out there for me. So I just hit a lot of meetings, because I didn't want to drink, but I also had no idea what you do if you don't drink. Like, what do you do in your free time? Who do you hang out with? Like, how do you go grocery shopping without first going to the liquor store to get your booze first? And making sure you have your booze first before you go to the grocery store to get food. Like, I couldn't wrap my head around a worldview that didn't involve drinking a lot. And so I just went to meetings, you know. And my first meeting I went to that eventually became, first meeting after that I went to that eventually became my home group was the Northern Plains group, NPG. Now, those of you that know NPG today, the face of it has changed a lot, because at that time, it's a nice way of saying, there's no nice way. It was a militant group at that time where when you showed up at least a half an hour early, wearing a suit, and then you hung out afterwards, you got a sponsor, you worked the 12 steps. And if you didn't, then clearly you're doing it wrong, and we now need to educate you, and we're all going to make sure we educate you, because you're going to start doing it right, because if you don't, you will die. So get your ass in gear. And I needed that, because my mindset, I don't learn anything from soft, gentle nudges or suggestions. That's just not how I, anyway, am wired. I only learn by getting hit in between the eyes as hard as possible with the sledgehammer, and in just as brutal a way as possible. Like, that's just how I learn. So I'm thankful now that at the time that I had that, and I just kept going to meetings. You know, if you're new and you're feeling anxious and uncomfortable at meetings, that's fine. I mean, because you're literally in the process of entering and changing your worldview, your way of life, looking at things. Like, things are changing. Growth is uncomfortable. You know, you go to the gym and you work out, your muscles are going to be sore afterwards, because you're putting them through stress and a change in life. So your my emotional state and condition was uncomfortable probably for the first, I bet I had anxiety really bad about going to meetings for the first year and a half, you know, but I didn't want to drink. And the only solution that had ever been put forth to me of seeing people that didn't drink and actually lived a decent life was they just went to meetings and got a sponsor. So I'm like, well, fine, I'll do that. And I'll do it to the best of my ability. That way, if it fails, it's not my fault. That was my thinking. That's why I got a sponsor. That's why I worked the steps. Is because I was going to basically say, if this doesn't work and I drink again, I can then blame it on the program. Here's the thing. If you do that and you do everything that the Big Book says and you get a sponsor and you work the steps, you're going to stay sober. So it's not going to fall on you. It's not going to fail on you. And so that's what I did. I got a sponsor, and if you're worried about what a sponsor is and all that stuff, you know, a sponsor is just someone with just my experience anyway, just someone with a little bit more experience than you, who's worked the steps, who can guide you through them. And for me, my sponsors and myself, it's not this kind of like hierarchical relationship, you know, where it's like, oh, that's my sponsor and I have to bow down and this, that. No, we're just drunks trying to stay sober together. You know, the first word of the first step is we. It's not I, it's we. It's a we program. We have to do this together. You know, the date of AA's founding, June 10th, 1935, is AA number 2's sobriety birthday, Dr. Bob, not Bill's. Because when it was just Bill, it wasn't AA. There was no we, there was no fellowship. We don't celebrate our anniversary until there's a fellowship, and that was June 10th, 1935. So, you know, I got a sponsor. I work the steps. We meet how I do it, how I did it with my sponsor then and how I do it with guys I sponsor now. We meet once a week. I start them out right with the doctor's opinion. I give them homework before we even meet. You're going to read the forewords, and then we're going to meet and go through the doctor's opinion right away. We're going to go through a chapter a week, and if you do everything like you should, we're going to have you all the way through the steps and 10, 11, and 12 and doing your amends before you're 6 months sober. Because if you don't work the steps, it's my experience that you're just playing Russian roulette is all you're doing, because you don't know if you don't have, or if you're not actively working on connecting with something greater than you to stay sober and you're just relying on yourself, eventually alcoholism will win every single time. Like that's a non-contest right there. Alcoholism always wins. So that's what I did. I worked the steps. I grinded it out. I went to, and I still do every now and again when I don't feel that way, I went to meetings when I did not want to go to meetings. I sobered up in January of that year, and then that summer I was running my dad's lawn care business because he had to sell it because his back went out, so he had to go on disability. So I was running his lawn care business and running the business full time, and I was going to 5 to 8 meetings a week because I just didn't want to drink. I had to stay busy, and I had to figure this program out, and I had to get through these steps, and I had to get honest, and I had to do it, and I needed to get sober. And the miracles started happening, the promises, I should say, started happening. I started slowing down a little bit. It took me years to slow down. Like, I'm a little high-strung now, but it's nothing compared to what I was when I came in. Like, whoa, years to slow down. And I started slowing down. People started commenting and how things were going better for me, like how I was happier, like I was better to be around, like just all that stuff started happening. And I worked all 12 steps in order under sponsorship guidance, and if you're new or you're freaked out about the steps, don't. Like, there's nothing in the steps to be afraid of. There's not. And if you're looking at them and you're seeing things like inventory and making amends and all that stuff, don't jump ahead in the steps and don't lump them together. You'll often hear 4 and 5 lumped together and 6 and 7 lumped together and 8 and 9 lumped together. Well, they're separated. They were originally 6 suggestions, but Bill broke them apart into more palatable chunks because it's just too much for an alcoholic to wrap his head around at a time. And if you're going through the big book under sponsorship guidance, how they tell you to go through the steps, when you get to a specific one, if you work the previous one to the best of your ability, not perfect, but the best of your ability, you'll be fine when you get there. You will be okay. You will get through it all right. There's people in this program who've made every imaginable amends that you can possibly think of. There was recently a story in the paper about in 1990 something, a bunch of airline pilots got drunk at the Speakeasy in Moorhead and flew a plane down to the city's drunk, and the guy who flew that, got arrested and went to federal jail. Well, his story's in the big book now, and you can read and you can hear his talk on YouTube and stuff, and he made that right. Like every amends you can think of in this program, if you dig deep enough, you can find someone who's had a similar experience. Now, usually at this point when I speak, I go through kind of like what early sobriety was and stuff like that, but when we share at meetings, you can either share kind of like what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, or experience strength and hope is another sort of framework. And I'm going to sort of jump ahead in my sobriety and kind of share about living life on life's terms. Because a lot of times when you hear speakers, not a lot of times, a sizable minority of the times when you hear speakers talk, they have sort of this canned narrative where they got sober and it was tough, and then they went a little crazy, and then they worked the steps, and then they got married, and then they had the 2.5 kids, and now they have the car with 2-stall garage, and they have the job, and it's blah, 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 and there's unicorns and rainbows, and it's great. I don't relate to that because that's not life. When you get sober, when I got sober, I started living life on life's terms, and life happened. I moved up to Grand Forks in 2012. Started working on a PhD in history. Got 3 years into that program, and then just a dumpster fire of existence occurred, and I failed out of that, and that took me for a tailspin. And I got another job up in Grand Forks working for a nonprofit, working with disabled people. I did that for 5 years. And then, we had this little thing called the pandemic strike in 2020, and that just completely etch-a-sketch. Let's shake Cody's life up and change every variable possible in my life. My job laid me off, and I had to go on unemployment insurance with, you don't understand, that is just a no-no for me, because I literally started working when I was 6 years old. There were times where I've had 4 jobs. In early sobriety, I was going to school full-time, working the graveyard shift as assistant manager at the Staymart truck stop, and I was only sleeping 6 nights a week because, by God, I have work to do, and if I don't sleep one night, well, that's just the price I'm going to pay, because that's just what men do, and you just suck it up and you do it, very a little extreme mindset. So here I am, being forced against my will not to work, not to do anything. So that took me for a loop, so I rolled with it and started lived in a house at that time, so I rebuilt the basement because that got flooded out the year before, and then, we got through that, and then I did a career change. I found another job, which, a career change, like a complete 180 career change. I'm in a completely different area. I work for the state of Minnesota now. It's different people, different everything. I had to learn all of that. So that was a tailspin and really spun me hard, and then I don't know how you feel. I don't care how you feel about this. I had to put my cat to sleep. It was an elderly cat I adopted when he was 18, and he was special needs, and I had to give him meds twice a day, and he was my little support animal going through the pandemic, so I had to put him down. So it's all right, that's enough, universe. We've had a career change. I put my cat down. Let's pump the brakes here, all right? Well, nope, 2021 wasn't done with me yet. It was, I forget what day it was, but it was May of 2021, and I was at work. So work by this time, I've been at work for about 4 or 5 months, whatever. And work was calming down, and I was getting used to it, and it was getting into a groove. And I was at work, and my phone rings, and I look at the caller ID, and it says Mom's cell. And I was like, oh, shit. Because my mom never calls me during the day. Texts all the time, but never calls, because she's at work, I'm at work, I'm a millennial, so we text all the time. She's wants to be a millennial, so she's adopted the texting and stuff. So she's calling. So I breathe before I picked it up. I went, okay, here we go. Picked it up. I go, hello. First thing's out of her mouth. Cody, your brother's dead. Oh, shit. My brother Jerry was 12 years older than me. He's from my dad's first marriage. And he was one of those alcoholics who was 100% constitutionally incapable of being honest with himself. He was people think alcoholics are weak-willed individuals. That's not true. We're probably the strongest individuals, have the strongest constitution ever to go through the stuff that we go through. Because you name it, he did it to himself. He was the type of person where one time he got a job. Now, he was a white boy, blonde hair, blue eyes. And he got a job, he lived in Denver, at a Mexican cowboy bar as a bouncer, because then he could legally, and he would get paid to beat people up and take their drugs and money that he caught them using. And he did it for the fun. That was his idea of fun. His head went through multiple windshields. He got jumped by a bunch of guys in a park and had a skateboard broke over his head and was bleeding out of his ears and was still walking around. He'd blow out his knee and didn't go to the doctor because people were blowing their knees out before there were doctors, so he didn't need to go in. His words. He went blind in one eye, just everything conceivable, and he just kept pushing through it and kept drinking. And I was, the other night at our home group, my friend Don chaired it the other night, or a couple weeks ago, and he had the topic be surrender, and I'll be ever grateful for him having the topic be surrender, because it got me thinking about that word. And I did a little research, and I realized, there's lots of articles on surrender, it's in a bunch of literature, but the one part the word surrender is not used is in the first 164. There's words like concede to our innermost self, things like that, but not surrender. Because Bill, who wrote most of the big book, he didn't write all of it, he wrote most of it, was a very methodical writer and very specific about the definition, because when you look up surrender, it usually uses the example of a fight with an army. And statistically, in any fight, no matter how outnumbered there's always that very little statistical chance that the little guy could win. There's still the Alamo, if you punched all the variables into a computer, would still come out with like a small percentage chance that the defenders at the Alamo, for example, could win. And when it comes to alcohol and alcoholism, there is no percentage of chance of winning. There is no fight if you are an alcoholic. The end result is that you, myself, as the alcoholic, if I drink, will always lose. And, yeah, I'm going to read it. And if you want the clearest example of where unbridled alcoholism can get you, I'm going to read this. This is the end result of alcoholism in my brother. This 52-year-old male was homeless and lived in his inoperable van that was parked in the corner of a dirt lot. He was last known alive May 4th, 2021 at 1700, at which time he was described as having alcohol withdrawal and was very shaky. He was found unresponsive, lying face down in the dirt lot on May 5th, 2021 at 06:31. His medical and history included blindness in his right eye due to high pressure. His social history included 20 plus years of alcohol abuse, occasional marijuana use, and remote methamphetamine use. And his cause of death, secondary cause, contributing factor was ethanol withdrawal. So if you want to know where self-will and thinking that you can control it, that you can out-muscle alcoholism will get you, it will get you face down, dead, homeless in a dirt lot, found by some stranger. And he was found, they think that he was basically walking and just literally had a heart attack and he was dead before he hit the ground because he had no wounds on his hands. He didn't like try and stop himself. So he literally just died and fell over dead. So I had to go through losing a brother, and I immediately called my boss. I have an amazing boss, told her what was up. She's like, yep, go. Don't even bother coming in tomorrow. Before I was out of the parking lot at work, I was calling my sponsor, Tom. I talked to him. After I called him, I called his sponsor and one of my best friends, Eric, and talked to him. Then after I got off the phone with him, I called my other really best friend, Neil G., who lives down in the cities, and talked to him. So the entire drive down to Fargo from Grand Forks, I was talking to other alcoholics, because when the rush of emotion is that strong, I knew that if I didn't make sure I was completely plugged into the program, I was going to drink. Like, that many emotions I cannot handle on my own. I need to make sure I'm wired into AA, or I will drink. Because I knew I was going to go home and I was going to have to be there for my dad, who just lost his oldest son to alcoholism. And that is one of the worst feelings in the world, but it's also one of the strongest situations where you can practice these principles in all of your affairs, is being there and making sure that you're there for your father as he grieves the death of his oldest child. And I went all in on AA. I mentioned it, how this group is plugged into service work, and why I'm so big on that is starting in 2020, I became the DCM for District 13 up in Grand Forks, which, oh my God, if you really want to practice these principles in all your affairs and grow patience, tolerance, and understanding in every capacity imaginable, and even some that you didn't think were imaginable, just get involved in service work at higher levels. Because everyone has a voice, everyone has an opinion, and they all have a vote, which drives me nuts. So I'm thankful for that service commitment, because it forced me to stay accountable in the program and got me super involved at a level that I didn't think was possible. So I've always been big for service work, but after the last year and a half, it's June, I'm even more of a proponent of it. So I grinded it out through that. I got super involved in my home group even more than I was. Got even more current with my sponsor, even more current with my friends, all that stuff. And then I was like, okay, 2021, are we done now? If we could just be done now, that would be great. Nope. Then in September, if I pause when I'm speaking here, it's because I'm trying to make sure that I don't have to say anything that requires an amends. Because in September, I found out, how do I word this? I found out the realities of my marriage and realized that I needed to divorce my wife. So I left her, which, first off, I've always been the dump-e, never the dump-er in relationships. So now that paradigm was flipped, that was weird as hell. And then it's like, well, now you're going to change everything in your life. You're going to change your bank. You're going to change your relationship status. You're going to change where you live. You're going to lose friends. Like, let's change every conceivable variable in your life. And, I called my sponsor the night I decided to leave her. And he's like, well, you'll get through this. And then sort of as part of his smart assiness, he's like, well, you're not the first person in AA to get divorced. And he laughed at me a little bit. And I was like, yeah, you're right, dick, but you're right. And how I got through that, the guide rail I used to get through that was I kept telling myself over and over again, don't do anything that requires making an amends to anyone. And I will not do anything that requires me to make an amends to my ex-wife. I don't care if that's based out of like any resentment or anything like that. That's just not going to happen. So I went through that, which, oh my God, that was like, I did a complete new inventory with that because so much stuff had happened. And I just did a whole new inventory. And if you're freaking out about that, I always used to sell, because you got to sell the program. We're talking to alcoholics. Like, you have to sell the deal. Like, what's in it for me, basically. And I used to always tell people, doing the steps will give you the same wonderful spiritual experience as, getting drunk, like it'll be equal, it'll be great. And I can tell you that after I did my most recent 5th step with my sponsor, the feeling I got, the release that I got, the emotional let go that I got afterwards felt better than any drunk I ever had. It was the first time where literally I had just an internal feeling of feeling better than any drunk that I ever had in my life. And it was, it was like 2 months, no, it was like a month and a half after I left her. The divorce wasn't even final. And, it was great. I got through it. It allowed me to see things in the marriage that I was responsible for. I'm not always the easiest person to have any sort of relationship with, whether it's intimate or friendship. I'm a more tame, but I'm still a bull in a china shop when it comes to stuff a lot of the times. Also, my sponsor pointed out to me that I have to take responsibility and own up to the fact of the type of partners that I choose. Because, if you're mentally stable with no addiction in your family and no family issues and no mental health problems, you're just too damn boring. Like, I'm sorry, like, you're just too boring. Like, I like crazy. What can I say, And I have to own up to the fact that I like crazy, When you like crazy shit's going to happen, So I owned up to it, and it didn't excuse necessarily anything that I didn't do, but it made me okay with what I was going through. And because I had applied the principles in all of my life, I was in a good financial position. I was all right, everything. So in January, I was able to take an amazing vacation out to Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and Denver. In Philadelphia, I went to a meeting where I walked there, and as soon as I crossed the interstate bridge, I was the minority. I walked into a meeting that was at a traditionally all-black Catholic church. I was the only white guy there, and I felt right at home. I was welcomed. I still have his number. I got Mike from Philly in my phone if I ever need anything in Philadelphia, and it was amazing. I was in New York, and I visited Stepping Stones, which is if you're not familiar, it's the home of Lois and Bill Wilson, north of New York by about 45 minutes. Had a tour of that place, and that was amazing. And then because I'd been grounded in working these principles in all my affairs, it put me in a good spot, allowed me to go on this vacation, and I was able to visit Stepping Stones. I connected with the archivist, and I'm now volunteering online, going through and working on transcribing the entire Stepping Stones archives that they have. We're working with that online right now. So, I'm a history nerd, and I literally have full, complete computer access to the 10,000 document archive of Stepping Stones that has everything Bill and Lois ever wrote from there. I came back, and on that trip, when I went to Denver at the very end, I visited St. Mary's Glacier where my brother's ashes were spread. and I was able to go there and have that closure of seeing where he was spread and saying goodbye and having that moment of being okay with that. And then I came back, kept doing the service work, kept doing everything, and then kind of finally the last thing I went through was in February, a guy I was sponsoring who just would not work the steps. He went to treatment, which was like his 6th treatment, so it was like just a 28-day vacation basically, and then he's like, I just need a job, and then I'm going to move to Fargo, and then he refused to go to meetings, and he finally fell off the face of the planet, and I was just hoping he was just drunk. That was my best case scenario. But I found out in February, a member of our home group gave me a call, and the demons got too much, and the guy, my sponsee, killed himself in February. So alcoholism took another one, and he just would not work the steps, and it's very, very hard for me to have a lot of, my heart, I realized, and I'm working on this, I'm not perfect, I need to have a gentler heart when it comes to the still suffering alcoholic, because that could be me. And I realize I've been a little calcified over the last year when it comes to alcoholics. I'm just like, well, it sucks to be you, I've become a little harsh, and I've realized that's something I'm working on. Because my life today is beyond, it's amazing. My parents told me that a couple weeks ago, they said that it was good to have me back because I'd been gone for a long time. And I didn't realize how clouded I had been with the relationship, with everything else, and how I hadn't been putting myself first in a healthy way like I should have been for a very long time. And I was blinding myself with a character defect of over-extreme loyalty that I have, which can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing if you ignore the warning signs and stuff. So I'm okay with myself today. I'm super busy, I go to 3 or 4 meetings a week, I'm in service work, but when Friday comes and I have legitimate, healthy alone time, and I'm okay in my apartment just hanging out with my cat, I'm okay with just me. I don't need any external anything to feel okay. I have great friends today, I've made a lot of connections with family members, and life is good today, So if you're new, and I know there's some newer people here, and you're thinking, I cannot relate to this guy who's been sober 17 years and all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. That's okay. Just stay sober for today. And if today's too long, which there were times when I was going through the divorce where today was too long, where I'm like, I'm just going to stay sober until I've done cleaning my toilet. And then I'm going to reevaluate if I want to stay sober or not. And it's like, hey, toilet's clean, what's next? Oven, cleaning the oven, break it down into smaller increments, because no matter what you're going through, whether you're freshly new or you've been here a long time and you're thinking of going back out, no matter how dark the pit seems, this too shall pass. As long as you stay in the program, keep grinding it out, even if you can't see the end of the tunnel, this too, whatever you're going through, will pass, and you will be okay. No matter what, you will be okay. You do not have to drink over anything. If I drink today, it'll be because I've chosen to do it. It's impossible for me to have a slip, because it would be a choice if I went back out at this point in time, because I have so many tools in my life. So you don't have to drink today. Thank you for my sobriety. You've kept me sober. And with that, I will pass. Thank you.